Let's start with the fact that nuclear energy emerges from the lab. So we learn that we can split the atom at the lab level. And that is important because I think that a lot of people think that the ability to split the atom begins with the bomb program. But the bomb program begins after we realize we can split the atom at the lab level. I think it's also important because I think there's still some sense among some people that we could make nuclear go away. But if it is, when you understand that it comes out of physics, at the lab level, then there's no way to get rid of the knowledge of nuclear fission, of splitting atoms. The first application of nuclear energy is to make a weapon. We make 2 bombs, we drop them on Japan. So the first application is to use the weapon to end a war. And afterwards, it's a shocking event. So it's a shocking event and by the way, I'm working on a new book on nuclear, specifically on nuclear. It's a shocking event because of the power of and I should say too that people have been thinking about this power since really the end of the 19th century. But really with Marie Curie and Pierre Curie in the very early 1900s with the discovery of radium, there's a sense in which there's atomic energy, and once you release it, it'll be enormous. So it's a shocking event. It's before the bomb is used, it is understood by a small group of people as having significant implications for the relationship between nations. And that people understood that it would mean that small nations would be able to defend themselves from invasion from large nations. And so this is known as the nuclear revolution in military. So it changes this old calculation, which is that large states can swallow up small states or can invade easily and take over small states. So suddenly we realize that small states can defend themselves. And it also then quickly gets to appreciating a paradox, which is that there's no way to properly win a nuclear war. And that it's 2 scorpions under glass in Robert Oppenheimer's famous picture, and that that one nation that would use nuclear weapons against another nuclear armed nation would be committing suicide. So that, I think, creates a paradox, which is that something so dangerous could create a form of safety in the form of deterrence. And this is a very confusing point. In fact, my wife said to me the other day, she goes, because when there was this stuff around Ukraine and Putin was sort of saying, reminding everybody that he has nuclear weapons, that the US getting too close to him could result in nuclear war. My wife said, but you don't think that that's possible? And I said, well, sure, it's possible. And she said, but you don't think it would happen? And I said, well, this is the paradox, is that if you stop fearing nuclear weapons, then they don't work anymore. Mm-hmm. And so the reason that nuclear weapons work to keep the peace is because there is a possibility that they could be used. So I don't want to get too far down the track, but so one thing about nuclear weapons, though, is that they genuinely pose something close to an apocalyptic threat, if not apocalyptic. There's a debate about whether nuclear winter is probable or not, but we know that full-scale nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union, which are the 2 countries with significant weapons, are one of the only ways that we can imagine for civilizations to destroy themselves so quickly. So I do think that nuclear weapons do pose a significant threat to civilization, and I also think that they have spread peace between nations, and that that's occurred between the United States and the Soviet Union and China, and now we see it between India and Pakistan. And so that's the first observation. Second observation is just the time around nations acquiring nuclear weapons is the most dangerous moments. And so I get nervous. It's when North Korea gets the bomb that everybody gets nervous, but then some years pass and things stabilize. Just to cut to the chase of my book, in terms of weapons, I think that it's time for the Western Alliance to have 3 nuclear umbrellas rather than 1. I think it's time for Japan and South Korea to have their own nuclear arsenal and defend themselves and potentially Australia from an increasingly aggressive China. before China takes too many small islands, and that it's time for Western Europe to defend itself, and that means Britain, France, and Germany. In terms of the energy...
So hold on, let's pause there, because you've said a lot, and I want to say a lot of what you've said I don't disagree with.
Okay.
I do think, I would phrase the paradox this way. If we have nuclear weapons, they will be used in earnest, and it could be existential.
Used? How do you mean by? What do you mean by used? Do you mean detonated?
I mean they will be used aggressively.
Do you mean used as deterrence or used as detonated?
No. I think the paradox is this: the deterrence works.
Yes.
It makes for a more peaceful year to year. Things are more peaceful because of the threat of nuclear war.
Correct.
But if you have that as a permanent mechanism, eventually the dice will be rolled in an unfortunate way, and they will be used in earnest. And
that's not what I don't agree with that last part.
No, I'm adding that part.
Okay.
And I think it's frankly just statistically the case, which is as you point out, if there's really no threat of them ever being used, then they're not an effective deterrent. So the fact of them being an effective deterrent says that there is a danger that they will be used. And then the question is, whatever the magnitude of that danger is, spread it out over enough time, and it says, oh, they're going to be used.
Oh, I'm not with you on that last part.
I know.
Okay.
I know, but I'm just saying.
I was with you all the way up until that very last sentence.
This is a mirror of where we're going to end up with nuclear energy, interestingly. I didn't see this coming, but I now do. So my point is actually, I think it's just a mathematical question. We agree that they work as deterrents, and that says that we can't afford to use them for that purpose indefinitely. You could use them for a short time, and in fact, it was pretty effective, after World War II for a good chunk of time. And then this also raises the specter of my brother's point. I don't know if have you heard it?
No. We didn't talk about it.
My brother, and by the way, I love my brother. I think he's one of the most insightful people on earth. This particular point of his is one I am not fond of at all.
Okay.
His point is we need above ground nuclear testing in order that people are reminded of just how dangerous these weapons are so that we will not use them. Right?
I don't agree with that either.
Right. Well, let's put it this way. At the level of thought experiment, I think he's right, which is that just as you point out that the deterrence requires the actual threat, it also requires that people understand how serious that threat is. I don't know how much that is increased by an above-ground nuclear test, because it's not like most people can observe it.
We don't need it.
Right.
There's sufficient fear of nuclear weapons and nuclear war for there to be deterrence. In fact, I think that a significant quantity of the fear of nuclear energy is displaced fear of nuclear weapons.
All right. You will find that mine is not.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
But in any case, so we've arrived somewhere interesting. You and I agree on the basic picture that year to year the world is less inclined towards war because of the specter of these weapons being used.
Yep.
But that if they were used in earnest, that the net benefit might be radically reversed. Right?
Could be.
Yeah. Especially in a major exchange.
Yeah. What makes you so sure that if you have nuclear weapons that they'll be used? Detonate.
Oh, I think you're sure of it too. I think you just
realize it. No, I don't. I don't think so.
No, here's why.
Yeah.
You said yourself that in order for deterrence to work, you have to have fear that has to be based on the possibility that they would be used.
Correct.
So if it's a possibility, how long do you have to extend time before that possibility becomes probable?
It's Zeno's paradox. It's like,
no, it's not.
Why? No, because just because something's possible doesn't mean it's happening.
How low can the risk be and still function as a deterrent? How close to zero can you get without losing the deterrent?
It's not so first of all, it's worth pointing out that it's an unresolvable. It's not something that you and I are going to be able to muster any evidence to resolve.
It's a thought problem.
Yeah, it's a thought problem. It's an interesting one because I've never. It's in the literature. Like, this is all the books basically that have ever been written on the bomb. It's in there. There's a lot of people that say it, and it always struck me as a statement of faith rather than a statement of
what?
That
mine's a statement of math.
But that's not math. Math. It's a statement of.
If there was a 1 in a billion chance of a nuclear exchange, would it function as a deterrent?
I think it's higher than that.
Yeah, how high?
It's very. I mean, look, we're just not. I think there's a risk of scientizing this and creating false precision by quantifying it. No, it's literally like it's kind of like
no. Look, I'm not making an argument that I know or that the number is even stable enough to estimate.
Yeah.
My point is, if the number is
not 0,
0.5% a year, we're talking about a very short ride, right? How many years do you get to play that game?
Yeah. Well, let me introduce another piece of this. Let's say, so the two countries that, I would say two countries that are most at risk of nuclear conflict, and I'm not alone in this, are India and Pakistan.
Yep.
They get into, so first of all, they keep fighting wars, and the number of people that die in the wars goes down.
Yep.
And recently there was a battle between India and China, and it was like a joke. Like in terms of, because both sides are like, we don't want this to escalate.
Right.
So, but let's say it did, and you had a nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan. Why do we think it would escalate beyond Kashmir?
Oh, it might not.
It might not. Yeah. So in other words, it's actually, I think it's important because there's sort of a common idea that if anybody there's a concept called nuclear taboo.
Yeah.
Which is that. Which I agree exists, which is that leaders actually don't want to use nuclear weapons because if they do, they would violate a taboo.
Yep.
Now, Putin did violate a taboo by invading Ukraine, and he's being punished for it. But it's not inconceivable that you could imagine that in 10, 20 years, that Europe and Russia would be back to where they were in 2021.
Yep.
But there is an argument that if they use the nuclear weapons, they would be more like Nazi Germany in their ostracization. So, but I think part of the nuclear taboo that I don't agree with, or that's part of that story, which is that if nuclear weapons are ever used, they would set off a chain reaction. And I think that chain reaction stuff comes from the apocalyptic mentality, which is more like, no, if nuclear, and Vipin Narang, who's a professor at MIT, who I rely on a lot for nuclear games, playing out games, he thinks that if a nuclear weapon were used, the whole world would everything would come to a halt, and that there would be a huge effort to basically prevent escalation. I tend to think that's true. I'm not saying it's a guarantee against it, but I think that there is a non-apocalyptic scenario for nuclear weapons. I don't love it. I'm not promoting it. I don't think we should. I don't think it should reduce our fear of it. But I also think there's a risk of thinking that any use of nuclear weapons would necessarily escalate.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm agnostic about that. I think there's a possibility that once, let's put it this way. Everybody likes being in the club where they're from a nation that has never used these things, right? We're the only nation who has.
Yeah.
And as soon as that number of nations that have used them goes up, I think it does do something to the taboo. But no, I don't necessarily believe. In fact, I would expect probably not that if somebody launched nuclear weapons that it would necessarily result in, an exchange of everything we got.
Yeah. Like Russia could use tactical nukes in Ukraine, and I don't think the United States is going to respond by bombing Moscow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
okay.
I think that's pretty clear.
So we're agreement on that.
Yep.